Bibles, 2 Samuel chapter 9 in your Bibles, and page 37 in the book. 37 in the book. If you don't have a book, the books are up here. 37 in your book. In page.
Thank you.
Someone give me a brief recap of what we talked about last week. A brief recap of what we talked about last week. And please include the Shibboleth. What has King David done? That brings us to 2 Samuel chapter 9.
He decided to show kindness to descendant of Saul.
Okay. Anybody else? Can you tell me something about Shibboleth? Is this descendant of Saul? He's a crippled man. Okay. Anyone else? Was he from Harlem? Harlem.
Oh, Harlem.
Where was he from?
His father was best friend with David.
Okay.
David showed his kindness by, I will say, adopting him after the death of his father.
Where was he from?
Lodabar.
Okay, and what kind of land will you describe, and the Bible describe that land in its interpretation?
Yes.
Nothing, man.
It was for the outcast.
Okay, okay. Past people went there. So David had to send someone to find him. He was a crippled man. He was of Saul's descendants. And David wanted to show what?
His kindness.
Acts of kindness. Where did David get this from?
Kindness.
Acts of kindness came from where?
When Saul,
From God.
yeah,
From God.
when Saul did what he gave David, Saul's son Jonathan.
And so David remembered that. That Saul's son Jonathan kept him out of the fire. Okay, somebody read the bottom portion of page 37 on to 38, where it says David asked.
David asked, "Is there not yet any of the house of Saul, that I may show the kindness of God unto him?" Grace begins in the throne room and finds us. Like us, Mephibosheth did not deserve the kindness of the Lord. He was forgotten by his nation and abandoned by his family. There was no reason to remember Mephibosheth, but of God's kindness, David remembered this crippled man. David's servants were quick to remind David that Mephibosheth was crippled, as if that would turn David's heart. David didn't remember Mephibosheth for what he could get out of him, because Mephibosheth had nothing to offer the king. David was motivated by pure kindness. By the same token, God's motivation to reach out to us is pure kindness, and his kindness will reach to wherever we are. Mephibosheth was in Lodabar, which means no pasture. There was a barren, desolate place, yet the king found him. God's kindness seeks us out. As the prodigal son, it found him in a pig pen and brought him home. Asked Joseph. It found him in a dry cistern, and it lifted him as high as the second in command of Egypt. Asked the Samaritan woman. It found her at a well in the middle of the day. No matter where you are, God's kindness can find you and change your life.
Okay, right there. Let's stop right there for a minute. Someone describe in detail these three stories where acts of kindness were shown. Start with the first one. Prodigal son. Act of kindness. The standard of kindness comes from God, right? So David made that perfectly clear. So David is mimicking God, what God has done for him. Therefore, the standard of kindness comes from who? So it comes from God. So if we want to measure good things up, let's go to God. Okay, and see the things that he has done. First in our life, and then we'll be able to treat other people differently. So what was the whole thing about the prodigal son?
He took his inheritance and he wasted it. He went out and he partied and wasted it. And his father, he decided to return home because he was living. He wasted everything, and he didn't have anything. He didn't have anywhere to live. So he decided to go back home to his father because his father's servants were living better than him. His father saw him coming from afar off, and he greeted him, embraced him, and killed the fatted cow and gave him robe and cleaned him up and rejoiced because he was returned. So his father wasn't angry at him or bitter. He was just grateful that his son was lost and now he was found.
Okay, in the story of the prodigal son, he left and then he returned. He went into the world and enjoyed the loose living. What were some of the things that he did not learn when he was at his dad's house?
That he did not learn.
Because he went out there, he took his inheritance, so he was a rich man when he left. He went out and he hung out, he had a great time. But what are some things he didn't learn when he was at his dad's house?
Money management. Money management.
Management of money. Not everybody that leave home end up broke and have to come back. Some kids, when they leave home, they do very well. Sinning. Some kids leave home and hang out and live their own life the way they want to live their own life. They become CEOs, presidents of the United States, anything they want to be. Not everybody that leave home and spend their money come back to the security and comfort of home. But he didn't know how to manage his money. What was something else about him that you noticed in his loose living?
He didn't know to choose his friends. Poor friends.
Poor people choices, right?
I would say he made poor choices all around. The fact that he spent all his money, yes, that's financial, but he couldn't even take care of himself. He was so low that he found himself in the pit, so he couldn't even manage him. So I think he learned humility and patience when he left his father, when he was out in the world, when he got back to his father's house. That's
Okay. All around bad choices, that even eating with the pigs, laying down in slop, the smell and youngest the pigs looked at him like he was crazy. You know, I don't know what you're doing over here, but we're fine. We're fine. This is where we live. Okay? Bad choices, all around bad choices. Obviously, he didn't learn anything in his home. He went out into the world, didn't understand and didn't know what the world was. Dad knew what the world was, but he didn't teach the kid how to manage his money. My thing is this, and has always been about us as parents. If you're not going to teach your kids about Christ, you better teach them about the world. You got to prepare them for the world, because if that's what they're going to choose, you and I need to tell them what the world is like, warn them what the world is like, and show them in a way that at least it's going to come with some direction from us. You know, when you drop your kids off, just say, hey, look, this is it. If you're going to act stupid, you didn't learn it at home. So these are some of the things that's going to happen to you. These are some of the consequences of the choices that you may make. But But pick yourself up. Always leave that. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get back into the race. All right, next story. Next story.
Joseph was sold by his brother to the Egyptian as a slave.
There's a lot of kindness shown to Joseph. And I would even say even from his brother, one of his brothers suggesting that they not kill him. So although they did leave him, but there was an act of kindness still shown there.
Okay, one of the brothers didn't.
One of the brothers
Yep, one of the brothers said, "Hey, look, man, let's not kill the boy." You know what I'm saying? I mean, come on. I mean, he is a knucklehead, but let's not kill the boy. What actually got Joseph in trouble? What two things got Joseph in trouble? No, before that, with his brother. With his brother. Okay, he was a dreamer. Sharing his dream, saying, "Y'all gonna bow down to me. Y'all gonna bow down to me. Y'all gonna serve me.
I don't think he said that.
Y'all gonna serve me. Dad, you, mom, all y'all gonna serve me."
So they said it that way.
Okay, and that coat. The coat was something. The coat was something. Not everybody got a coat. Okay, the coat really sent the brothers off the deep end, and the love of the father toward Joseph more than the rest of them. And then you would find out when their dad died how he gave each one of those boys a charge of who they were and what they were. So when you look at the beginning of the picture with Joseph, the whole Egypt and the end of their life, of dad's life, and how he charged each one of them, you can see that each one of those kids had a problem, and each one of them was just as bad as Joseph was, and Joseph was the one that found grace because that's where the seed was coming through. And Joseph had a lot of things going for himself, but he talked too much. He shared too much. Some dreams you need to keep to yourself. Obviously, that one was one of them, okay? And hey, Dad, these are some big boys. They're out there working hard. At least give them a coat with one color. All right? Just give them a coat with one color because you keep sending me out there to them. All right? I know you like me. It's obvious that, you and mom got this thing for me. I understand that, and I truly appreciate it because I don't have to work hard. But Dad, when you keep sending me out there and I'm just parading around with this Technicolor dream coat, it's not going to go over well. So, at least let me take with one color in it, and, that'll take some of the heat off of me. So he didn't see it that way. Dad didn't see it that way. So the little rut had to go. He had to go. So one of the brothers said, no, hold up. No. And which brother did Joseph ask for when he was disguised as king? Well, Benjamin. Right, he asked for him, right? And then he told them to what? Go get him and bring him back. And then Dad wanted to know where was Benjamin. So Dad replaced Benjamin with Joseph with Benjamin. Where's Benjamin? Y'all came back here without my son. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of things about that story where act of kindness was shown. So what was done for harm to Joseph, God found good, and then Joseph found the kindness that was done to him by God to bestow it upon his family, and because of that, the whole nation was saved and Egypt itself. Okay, now next story. Lord knows this woman was shown acts of kindness.
So
why? What was the first act of kindness to the Samaritan woman?
Well, Jesus talked to her. So the fact that he
conversation alone
acknowledged her was fundamental. Because Jews didn't talk to Samaritans, especially men.
Okay, acknowledged her. The very fact that Jesus was in her presence, talking to her, went out of the way to talk to her, well, she was shocked. Why are you talking to me? Strange. And why you as a Jewish man talk to me as a Samaritan woman? But Jesus didn't go there because he had something else he wanted her to see. What were some other things about the acts of kindness that he bestowed upon her? The conversation was one. What about the content of the conversation?
Then he's talking to her about water, living water. Because she was at the well to draw water. Which was a repeated story. So when we talked to her about the living water, she wanted to know more about it. She said she wanted it, so she would have to come back here to draw the water, but that's not what Jesus was talking about.
Business as usual. If Jesus hadn't talked to her about the living water, she would have went back to the life that she was living. He didn't condemn her, nor did he save her. He acknowledged what was going on in her life. She went back and told everybody what he said to her. So this gotta be the Son of God, because I've done some things and I'm currently living in a situation that has got me ostracized here. So the act of kindness came from the conversation with her, acknowledging who she was, showing her that her lifestyle needed to be addressed, and giving her a way out to look at herself and to understand that there is more to her story than what the eye sees, and that God loves her and will forgive her and change her life. The church was coming, so there was a place for her in her living, in her lifestyle. There was a place for her. Hypothetically, it's not printed. Do you think she went back to the dude she was living with?
No.
No. What do you think she did for a living?
Well,
So water?
went down back to the dude.
So some pots of water?
Or maybe she married. Maybe she did and she married. Right?
Well, we can only surmise that from the encounters that Jesus had with people.
She was her husband.
No, it's just for discussion. I can't prove either way what she did. I don't know what she did. I don't know if she went to the next town, started all over, or what. But I know one thing. He changed her life just like he changed Matthew's life. Matthew came out of the dinner party saying what? Matthew the tax collector. What did Matthew say? Jesus changed the dinner party.
He will give back to everybody what he paid from them.
Yeah. Whatever I took from people, I'll give back. And then some.
And more.
Yeah. So the act of kindness that Jesus apparently showed by coming into his home and eating with him changed the way he looked at himself, his friends that was at the table, because he invited all his crooked friends, and it compelled him to change his life so much that he did what? After he paid back the money?
Follow Jesus.
Follow Jesus. Follow Jesus. Some of us are compelled to acknowledge our guilt. Yeah, I'm wrong. Stop what we're doing, which is repentance. Turn around and go the opposite way of a sinful living and follow Jesus. Some of us get the act of kindness. Some of us do. That cross is a display of God's unconditional love toward us, that while we were yet sinners, Jesus died anyway. So the kindness that God showed to us, that I'm gonna literally kill myself in the flesh to show you how much I love you. Build that bridge back to me, and my royal blood will be your redemption for me. That every time I see my son, I will see you as my son. Can't beat that with a big stick. Any of y'all got a better plan of forgiveness? Don't you wish your bank would do that? Your mortgage company? The finance company that owns your car? Don't you wish they would be like Jesus and just say, hey, look, make this telephone call to you on day 29. And say, you know what? The bank just paid off what you owe. Wouldn't that be nice? Some of y'all saying, y'all know good enough for y'all do somersaults. All right, someone read David's kindness changed Mephibosheth's life. Next paragraph.
God's kindness doesn't only make us his servants, which is a part of the royal priesthood, the sons and daughters of Mephibosheth.
You gotta go up to.
Maybe as a boy,
Page 38.
David's
I know I
kindness.
don't read.
David's kindness.
David's kindness.
Oh,
There you go.
sorry. David's kindness changed Mephibosheth's life. Mephibosheth could not help himself. He couldn't reach David if he had to. Because of Mephibosheth's weakness, David sent men to carry him. This is another beautiful picture of kindness of God. His grace is dependent upon his ability, not yours. When you can't walk any further, let his grace carry you. When you can't believe anymore, let his grace carry you. When you're weak, let his grace carry you. His grace will carry you and position you at his banquet table. Maybe as a boy, Mephibosheth pretended that what it would have been like had he been the royalty he was born to be. But time had taken those dreams away. And David looked down at him and restored his place in the palace. Not only was Mephibosheth given a position of royalty, he was given a position of family. He was treated as one of the king's sons. God's kindness doesn't only make us his servants or just a part of the royal priesthood, but sons and daughters. Mephibosheth was a position of personal fellowship. He always had the king's ear. Christians have a place at the table of God. We have his ear. Why do we have this position? Mephibosheth wasn't receiving grace on the basis of what he'd done, but on the basis of what Jonathan, his father, had done. 2 Samuel 9:7. Likewise, we are not receiving God's favor on the grounds of our own works, but on the works of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. That is good news.
All right, everybody turn to Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18. Matthew 18 is well known for offenses. Someone read the parable of the unforgiving servant, verse 21 to the end of the chapter.
Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus said unto him, I say not unto thee unto 7 times, but unto 70 times 7. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king, which would take account of his servants. And when he had begun to reckon, one was brought unto him which owed him 10,000 talents. But forasmuch as he had not to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife and his children, and all that he had, and payment to be made. The servant therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. Then the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion, and loosed him, and forgave him the debt. But the same servant went out and found one of his fellow servants, which owed him 100 pence. And he laid hands on him, and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me what thou owest. And his fellow servant fell down at his feet, and besought him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. And he would not, but went and cast him into prison till he should pay the debt. Servants saw what was done. They were very sorry, and came and told unto the Lord all that was done. Then his Lord, after he had called him, said unto him, O thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all that debt, because thou desirest me. Shouldest not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? And his Lord was wroth, and delivered him to the tormentors, till he should pay all that was due unto him. So likewise shall my heavenly Father do also unto you, if ye from your hearts forgive not every one his brother their trespasses.
What is the act of kindness in Matthew 18? Verse 21 and on to the end of the chapter.
Forgiving the debt for the servant.
How many parables did Jesus tell in this chapter? in chapter 18, where he got to this story of illustration. And what was he talking about?
It's all about how much time you're supposed to forgive.
Hmm?
You don't know how many times you're supposed to forgive others.
Okay. What word is used time and time again in this parable? Offenses and what else? What other word? Sinning, right? In Matthew chapter 18, verse 19, explain it to me. Based on what was already said in Matthew chapter 18, explain verse 19. What is the importance of verse 19? Again, I say to you that if two of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done to them by my Father in heaven.
Can we go back to what he's talking about, the context? Okay, so basically it's talking about if your brother has fault with you, if you were upon with one of your brothers in the church, they said you should go to them and try to sort it out with them, try to fix the issue. And if that doesn't work, you should take one or two with you. And they said basically whatever, if two of you who are spiritual, go to that person, try to fix it. Whatever you say will also be taken account of in heaven. So
Okay.
basically God will condone it.
Okay. So if you take somebody else with you in a matter of offense, and between the three of you, the one that's offended or the one that is given the offense, between the three of you, if you guys work that out, Jesus said that he's in the what? He's where in that conflict?
He's in the midst of it.
He's in the midst of it. Okay? So if someone, and brothers and sisters, when we start talking about offense, we're not talking about not speaking to you on Sunday morning. That's not offending. That's not offending you. Don't honestly, that's not offending you. We're talking about something that will affect your worship. Siniki and Udiah had something against one another where it affected their worship. Paul said, y'all got to go help them sisters. Those sisters were servants of mine, assisting me in the servanthood and the deaconess business. They can't get it right. It's affecting their worship and where they worship. So somebody got to help them get through this. You hear me say all the time about get a little tougher on what's going. A lot of things going to happen to you. A lot of people are going to say things to you. And sometimes we have to get our act of kindness mode put on so we can understand what the true meaning of act of kindness is when it comes from a sinning brother. David had every right in the world to kill Saul. Amen? I mean, he was anointed king. And there could have been a time in these 10 years where, you know, David, instead of showing acts of kindness and respect to the king himself, he could have said, look, I'm tired of this. I ain't running no more. I ain't running no more. But how would God's grace and love would be displayed at 2 Samuel chapter 9 if David would have did that? Because remember, his best friend was Saul's what? So if you kill dad, what are you going to do with the rest of the brothers? Well, you're only best friends with one of the brothers. And when a new king come in, we done already read that last week. When a new king come in, he do what? Get rid of what? Old is out, new is in. Republicans, Democrats. You get rid of the Democrats if you're Republican. You get rid of Republicans if you're a Democrat. So the very nature of David imitating God, even in matters of offenses with a brother, we have to understand what the act of kindness is. And if we can get another person to get involved in that, not the church, Get another person to get involved in that. When that brother or that sister won't listen to us, call somebody else in, somebody that is objective, not your friend, who's going to take your side, somebody that's objective, to get the two of you to see what's most important in this disagreement and in this offense. If the three of y'all can do that, Jesus say, I'm sitting right in the room. I'm right in the room. Because it's hard for us as individuals to say I'm sorry and to accept apology. It's hard. Sometimes we may have to take a third person because we won't believe the person's apology. So it's hard. It's hard. This matter of offense is very hard. Ricardo?
Maybe I'm missing the concept here. But the very next verse 20 says, "For where two or three have gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst." Is he referring to worship, or what we're alluding to in terms of two or three people gathering together?
Yeah.
To come to an agreement. I'm thinking more of worship, like if two or three, like he's telling us not to be alone, and that whenever there's two or three brothers that come together, he's not in the midst of all of us.
Ever since you was born and I was born, we have misinterpreted this passage for worship. And the content of what he's talking about, find worship. Find it. That's why I asked you how many parables that Jesus has told. Take the chapter number and the verses out and read the story the way Jesus is speaking. When you get to verse 19, what is Jesus still talking about? Karen?
And that's the reason why when you asked the question about 19, I said, can I go back to what he's talking about? Because it was talking about the forgiveness, about someone having something against someone. So it all goes down. But the fact is that you said it right. We have misinterpreted that scripture from the beginning of time. And we still are doing it. Mm-hmm. People say it every single day, where two or three are gathered, God is in the midst. That's not correct. Right. And that's the excuse they give for why they don't have to come to worship, because where two and three are gathered, but that's not what it was talking about here.
Did you have your hand up? No? Where's the worship? See, I've been taught that all my life too. So I understand where you're coming from, Carl. I've been taught that all my life until I stopped the way it was taught to me and read it in its content. Jesus is not talking about worship because Jesus is not at worship when he's saying this. He is trying to get people to get their act together when they have disputable matters against one another, and the way they settle toward one another, and the way they offend one another. That has nothing to do with where they are and what they're doing in the synagogue. He's trying to get them to see that this is the most important thing. If you get somebody else to get you guys back on the same path here, you've won that brother over, and me and my Father is in the midst of that conflict. Ellis?
A couple of things here. First, the audience Jesus is talking to is to the disciples. So this binding has nothing to do with us. There's some cross-references verses that we have alluded to from John that he wrote in 1 John. 3:22, which he says, and whatever we ask, we receive from him because we keep his commandments and do the things that are pleasing to him. And then John wrote in 1 John 5:14, now this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything to his disciples, he hears us. That's a cross-reference that John is telling his audience after the fact. But in chapter 18, verse 1, it says the disciples came to him and asked who is greatest. And he's trying to get them to move their mind off of who is greatest, and then warns if that offended them. That's why that part is not that I disagree, but offense could be anything, because this conversation of offense only came because they were arguing who was greater. That offended them. You could argue have thick skin. Why would that offend you? So it's not about, to me, what is the offense? You not speaking to me could be offensive. Like to me in this church, when people walks by me, that's offensive to me. Because I know some of you since before you were married. So if you're going to walk by me, you should go to another church. Because don't come here and just walk by me at home. When people come over our house, if they walk in a room and don't speak to, that's offensive to me. That's rude to me. Now, you may come from a culture where you don't got to speak to people. But to me, that's dead rude if I walk in somebody's presence and don't acknowledge. So this whole conversation only started because they were asking. So he's saying, first of all, don't think like that. But now that you have offended each other, here's how you should work through this offense. To the point where Peter is saying, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? Not a random. How many times I got to keep forgiving my fellow disciples? So when you start talking about this binding and loosening in heaven, he's talking to his disciples who will be apostles that flow into this concept of Acts chapter 20, verse 7. When we use that verse to say, on the first day of the week, the disciples came together to break bread. That's why we break bread, because they bound that. They bound that on the first day of the week, we are going to break bread. Therefore, we can in 2018 say we want to break bread on the seventh day of the week, because he was not talking to us in the binding and the loosing. I think the issue that people have with this verse and misquoting it is because in the verse where it mentions the church, and people's concept of church is going to church. So when it says, if you can't resolve it with the three, tell the church in verse 17, people now think we switch to Sunday in the discussion. So when it gets to there, whether two or three are in your midst, people's mind misapplied is, I thought he was talking about church in 17. So therefore, he's still talking about church in verse 20, which is why people grab Lord's Supper and say, well, let me go take Lord's Supper with three people, and they use this verse. See what I'm saying? So the whole flow of this chapter is disciples and getting their mind to leadership, and in leadership, this I maintain, especially for men in church. You cannot be pleasing to God with issues with your co-laborers in Christ. That's what he's saying. You will never be able to bind in earth and loosen until you stop offending each other as men. As 12 men, you have to stop offending each other on the first couple of verses. Then he spent the bulk of the chapter talking about when you do keep offending each other, because he knew they wouldn't listen, to no longer be offended one to another. So I think the reason why people misapply this is because it mentions church, but it's mentioning the church as people, but people have a concept of going to church. In this chapter, there is not even a church yet. So therefore, there can't be a worship. But as soon as people hear the word church, they're thinking Sunday morning worship. And I feel like I've had Christians who have used this same verse to start talking about worship using the same deductive reasoning that the world does, because they said, oh, it's mentioning church. This has nothing to do with worship. It has everything to do with us as a church. But it's really talking to the disciples, and it's a suggestion or a woe or a warning to leadership. This is why I don't agree with you go over here, I go over here, we all worshiping the same God. Wrong. That's what the disciples tried to do. They tried to say, if I'm great over here, you great over here, we all doing the same thing. No, we only doing one thing. So therefore, if you're not doing one thing and you harboring resentment against Peter over here and James over here, both of you are sinning and wrong. So I think that is the very misconception, because we feel as people, I can just not speak to you and just, it won't be a big deal. So to me, that's what I get from this entire chapter.
All right, I'm going to read this the way it should be read, without the chapters and verses. Okay, now in order for you to get to church and to get worship, you got to prove that. So if you do a word study on church, worship, and synagogue, you'll see exactly where I'm coming from. Okay, because Jesus said, I came not to what the law, but to what? What did Jesus say about the law?
Fulfill the law.
To fulfill the law. So Jesus can't get rid of synagogue worship until he fulfills the law, correct? And the church age come after his what? Resurrection. So you can't have two covenants at the same time, but you got to do a word study on it. That's not our Bible study tonight. You got to do a word study on it. Jesus said this. Disciples came to Jesus saying, Who then is greatest in the kingdom of God? And Jesus called a little child to him in the midst of them and said, surely I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. Keep that in mind. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better to him if a millstone was hung around his neck and when he was drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe to the world because of the offenses. For offenses must come, but woe to that man by whom the offenses come. If your hand or your foot cause you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life lame and maimed, rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet and to be cast into everlasting fire. And if your eye causes you sin, pluck it out, cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life with 1 eye rather than having 2 eyes and be cast into hellfire. Take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I say to you that in heaven their angel always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. People say all the time, we all have guardian angels. This is what he got that from. For the Son of Man has come to save which was lost. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave 99 and go to the mountain to seek the one that is astray? If he should find it, surely I say to you, he rejoices more than sheep than over the 99 that did not go astray. So, even if it's not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. But if he will not hear you, take with you 1 or 2 more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. That is an Old Testament teaching. And you'll find that in your footnotes, and you go back to the reference, because it's italicized. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be with you like a heathen and a tax collector. Now, go back and study what the word means and what the Levitical law says about conflict in the synagogue, because you got to understand what this word is talking about. Okay? Ellis is right. Because the word says church, the first thing comes to mind to Christians means he's talking to us under this covenant. You can't have 2 covenants at the same time. God will never contradict himself. So if you go to other versions, you'll see that they don't even put the word church in there. So you go and you go and do the word study, and you see exactly what the interpretation of that word means, and you'll see exactly what offenses was and what you had to do under the law to exonerate a person that was having conflict with another person. And you'll understand that the teaching itself that Jesus is saying right here is a law teaching. So just go and study it and you see what I mean. But surely I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And again, I say to you that if 2 of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am in the midst of them. The conflict is still what Jesus is talking about. Call on me, talk to God, and we will be there to handle the conflict. Don't stop there, because Jesus is not finished. And don't look at the parable of the unforgiven servant, because that was put there. That was put there. When you have divided paragraph headings like that, that was put there in the writings. And those of you who have been to biblical school know what I'm talking about. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7, impossible number. You're not going to sit around and wait for people to sin that much and put yourself in front of people who are sinning that much. But nevertheless, that's what Jesus said, to make it impossible for you not to forgive somebody. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servant. And that's the one that we're talking about in this story right here. Okay? There was an impossible number for this guy to meet. And somebody read the first paragraph here to show us how much money he actually owed. On page 39.
David's kindness and exemplify the kindness we should show to others. Matthew 18, Jesus tells the story of a man who did the opposite. The servant was forgiven the debt of the modern equivalent of $10 million. The forgiveness is even more inconceivable when we recognize that the average wage in Israel at this time was about 17 cents American currency. It would have taken him 200,000 years to pay off that debt, and his master completely forgave it. The story does not end there, though. He leaves his master only to find a man who owes him 100 shillings, about $17. Takes him by the throat and demands his money. When the man is unable to pay, he has him thrown into prison.
Okay, what is the story telling us based on Matthew 18? Because they made the reference to Matthew 18. What is the story telling us about David's act of kindness toward Mephibosheth? Because can Mephibosheth do anything about his circumstances? The question to that is what? No. What does Mephibosheth have that he can honor David as king? Therefore, David didn't ask him for anything, right? Right. Okay, now back to Matthew 18 in terms of offenses and sinning. If you handle things right, what is God more concerned about? When you take a brother or two with you, what is God concerned about in Matthew 18, in that particular portion of Matthew 18? Restoring the brother. So the most important thing to God is restoring the brother, and the offense that occurred between you and the brother, where you guys can now walk in harmony, right? Okay. David is showing the act of kindness from God because God is the standard that we use for act of kindness. Okay, so when you get back to Matthew 18, Jesus is trying to teach his disciples something that when it do happen to them, they can understand what is the greater between the two. So Jesus goes into this parable about the unforgiving servant. He goes into this parable to let them know it is impossible for you to keep a grudge and to not resolve issues with people because it'll grow and it grow and it'll grow and it'll grow and it'll grow into some number that is what? Untenable. You just cannot do it. So forgive a person. Talk to the person about what happened and what's wrong. If people offend you to the level of what Ellis was saying, to whatever degree that is, you say to that person, because the person may not know. Some people just are rude. Some church people are like that. But if that bothers you, and in the offense category, talk to them about it. If that person's rude behavior pops up where they don't want to listen to you, it is still unresolved. Take somebody else with you, not your friend, but somebody else in church who can be objective to the story of offense. Let that person defend themselves, let you defend yourself, and then the objective person say, you know what? The three of us need to pray. Let's pray about this. Let's leave this room with this matter resolved. If the rude person say, nope, that's just the way I am, he's crazy or she's crazy, I'm not going to pay him no mind. Remember, where you at? Go call somebody else. Go call somebody else. Well, Jesus is trying to get us to see, number one, I am painting a picture for this person to see that if they don't forgive, I'm not going to forgive them their trespasses. Jesus is teaching that in his earthly ministry. Forgive those who what? Trespass against you, because I am forgiving you of what? Your trespasses. That's in the Lord's Prayer, correct? So if two people come back and try to resolve the issue and you don't resolve the issue, take it before the body. If the rude person still say, I'm going to remain rude, well, he's going to get this or she's going to get this fellowship anyway. But what happens to the decision-making in the congregation? Now you have to go back and study what the congregation's responsibility was in Israel and what the priests taught that you should do, and then you'll understand the word church because it'll break it down for you. Because if the person do not forgive, forget, and leave, that person is excommunicated. That was even under the law. Because you can't have somebody in the congregation who refuse to buckle under the teaching of God. And they gotta go. So when the church says that person is disfellowship because of that person's sin, you are no longer part of the offense in the sinning matter, because the matter has been handled in heaven by the decision that church has done based on the formula God has set up in Matthew 18. Okay, so if you go and read about the law and study about the law of offenses, and then go back to Matthew 18, and then go find that in the New Testament under the New Covenant, you will be on the same page as God. But it's not talking about worship. We've been taught that it's been talking about worship. And other things. This scripture is used for other things too. We've been taught that. You look.
In Luke 17, verse 3, it said, and this Scripture is not speaking about the congregation, it's speaking about the individual, right? It said, take heed to yourself. If thy brother trespass against thee, rebuke him, and if he repent, forgive him. So it's between two persons. It's not, when they say, well, as Ellis explained, the church, we are the church. So when it have a disagreement between, let's say, two members, as you're saying, we should come together and solve that problem. And that is what he's saying there. And forgive.
Okay. In order for this to be clear to you, you're going to have to study the Deuteronomy law. You're going to have to study the congregation. You're going to have to study the responsibility of a congregation of worshipers. You're going to have to study that word. And when you see the way that word is broken down in its interpretation and the way it's put in the Bible, then you'll come away with the conclusion that it's not worship. I did not reach this point just by reading it. I studied it. I studied it, and you will see. You would see that it's talking about the offenses. And Jesus is trying to teach it. There's a lot of things, y'all, that the apostles did as a group of men that irritated one another and Jesus too. Okay, there was a time when they was talking about Jesus, and Jesus walked up on them and said, I know what's going on in your heart. There were times when they just didn't understand what he was talking about, and they talked about him. People talk about one another in church. Amen. Some people can handle that. Some people can't. Lord knows I'm the target of all y'all on your good days and your bad days. So there's a level of thickness that I always say that I, or any public speaker for that matter, any author that has written a book, anybody that public speak has to understand this about his audience. Some is going to believe you, some is not. Some are going to have a good opinion about your book or what you're saying publicly, some is not. Some is going to disagree with the content that you're using to explain things, some is not. Some going to understand, some is not. Some going to come up to you later on and say, can you explain it? Same thing with you in class when you're being taught. In a big forum, some students will sit there and they say, they take it all in. And some students can't wait till you finish and say, hey, can I have some of your time? I need to understand that a little more, because not all of us take the information the same way. You know?
And that's what we have to understand. One in the say a little level, a little level for the whole law. And when one person infests the congregation, as you mentioned, I think it was last week or the week before, and I keep thinking about that, even in your home, if one on the right and one on the left, things wouldn't work out. There's no blessing. Everybody has to be in one accord, whether home or in a congregation. Because I'm going back to the politics. It have the right and it have the left.
Mm-hmm.
And I will put Satan on the left, God on the right. So which one we want to be? If we say we're on the right, we can have one foot on the right and the next foot on the left. Both of them have to be the same place. And for our congregation to grow, for our congregation, for God to bless us, and I'm not only speaking about this congregation, anyway, we have to be in one accord. We have to learn to forgive. We have to have a compassionate heart. We have to live as a family. We are a family. God is the head. We all are in Christ. He is the Father. If we prepare to go to that big mansion, and if we can't have that love and that unity and that peace and that compassion for one another, how are we going to make it when we all go to that mansion? And that is what I'm fighting with. This is my problem in Christianity. Because some going this way and some going that way. We in church, when I say church, we be together all the time, Bible study, and it's not we doing different studies. We all doing the same Bible study. We all listen to the same preaching, but we have the same Bible, but some going this way, some going that way, some going the other way, some honest, some sincere, some not trustworthy. Why? And we're the same congregation.
It's human. It's printed right here in front of us. It didn't start off well. These men had to learn God's act of kindness. David had to learn that. Everybody that God has used is just showing the Church of Christ in Bridgeport and the Church of Christ worldwide that there are going to be sitting among us. That's why Paul told Timothy, of gold and silver, wood and clay in a great house. There's going to be some of us who are not going to work in harmony with one another in the congregation. That's just a fact. And as a former shepherd, I can tell you that from spiritual experiences, people are not going to listen. Some people are going to think that what they think about what the scripture is saying is what they want to teach, and they'll go out there and do their own thing. Well, that happened in the first century church. Alexander and Coppersmith and all them, they took off and did their own thing. What did John say? They were not among us, and we did not send them. So the congregation here in Bridgeport, or the congregation worldwide, all of us are like that. I try to warn each and every individual in this congregation about things like this. So I'm glad that you see it. And I'm glad that people in the congregation here at Bridgeport need to understand that the leadership that it has is just telling you scriptural truth. I have no vested interest in anybody's life here other than what Christ says. And I'm only telling you what the Bible says. And I'm only trying to get you to see that just like me, I was told something different, but the Bible got me out of that. And I had to examine it first to see if it was true because of what I was taught in my upbringing. So now that I have the scriptures in front of me, I'm not going to let no one trick me out of my joy. And I'm not going to go back to that according to Colossians. That beggarly stuff where people was telling me what to do, how to do it based on that Pharisee teaching. I'm not going back to that. So that's how I can defend it. Mean what I said, just only asking you to go study it, and then you would see. It's no way in this world Jesus is teaching church to a Jewish audience of men and listeners when they don't even know what the church is. Do y'all understand that? Now, if you listen to the interpretation of congregation in its teaching when the word is used, that's why I want you to do the study. Now, me, I already did the study. Whenever you see the word church in the Gospels, you'll see the word congregation in its interpretation in the way it is written, so you'll understand what they're talking about. Because the church is not here yet. You can't put a covenant on top of a covenant that is still in effect by the person that wrote it. This is something you have to do. But according to this, and this was in the book, that's why we're there, Jesus told a story not only to demonstrate the abundantness of God shows us, but the lack of appreciation we have for the kindness when we do not show it to others. That's exactly what he's trying to get us to see in the act of kindness that David did based on the act of kindness that God gave him. That's all he's trying to do here in getting us to see Jesus taught in that manner. Because of David's kindness, Mephibosheth was brought to the Jerusalem. There the feeble, crippled legs of shame were hidden underneath the provision of the king's banquet table. Mephibosheth had not earned this right, but has given this right because of the kindness of God through David. What undeserving person will be delivered because of David's kindness through you? The story of Matthew 18, the things that you do on earth will be done in heaven, is the same thing that God agreed to. God agreed to the acts of kindness that David was showing Mephibosheth simply because David was acting off the act of kindness that God had given him. So God anointed the process because David was acting like him. And it pops off the pages. So you and I have a responsibility to what? Every day. Based on what? But we spend more time with other things. But if we walk around spending a lot of time with how God has delivered us, people will see that, and people will be drawn to the kindness of God simply because of the way we act. All the things that this King David did, my Lord, all the things he did in his life, is one thing we cannot condemn David for. He searched for God in the way God was. You can't take that away from him. And all the sinful things that happened in his life, all the leadership mistakes that happened in his life, 70,000 was killed. He had to make a choice. God gave him a choice when he did that census. The census wasn't bad, but David forgot to include God. 70-something thousand men lost their life because of that one mistake. And David said, take me and my household. God gave him three choices. Three choices that he had to pick. And he picked the family. Bad leadership from our president on down, our prime ministers and kings and queens all over the land. Bad leadership causes people to end up in this kind of position with that Mephibosheth was in, and on and on and on. So God wants us to display the act of kindness to get people to see his unwavering love toward mankind in this information. Ellis?
Let me read this on 39 because this kind of sums up. You started it, but what I was going to say. Jesus told this story not only to demonstrate the abundant kindness that God shows us, but the lack of appreciation we have for this kindness when we do not show it to others. What kind of message are we sending by the way we treat others? Are we showing them that we appreciate the kindness God has shown to us? We are God's primary instrument to express his love for the world. Are they getting the message? Take that question deeper. Is your family getting the message? Is the church getting the message? Are those you disagree with getting the message? That's why I love this, because I love Christians when we start talking about what we're doing, but what are we doing? That's why this is meat and potatoes of Christianity, not milk. Because if your family cannot attest to God in your life, you're failing as a Christian. It don't matter how much Lord's Supper you're taking. If your co-workers can't attest to the love of God in your life, you're failing. As parents, if your children can't attest, especially those of y'all who have grown kids, you're failing. It don't matter if you baptize 10,000 people. Don't matter if your kids agree with you, but can they see the love? That's what I'm saying. How are we treating people? That's why I said about being rude. You can't convince me you a good Christian rude to somebody. I would argue, to be honest with you, you can't convince me you being the best Christian you can if you don't notice somebody. People say, oh, sorry, Ricardo, I didn't even see how I don't see Ricardo there. And I'm a Christian. See what I'm saying? That's the real part of Christianity. We get so caught up in what we're doing, but what are we doing? If you're not like a little kid, what do little kids do? Little kids are always happy. They could be crying, You could have spanked them in 5 minutes. Do they hold that against you? Nope. They move on. So as Christians, how are we acting like children act one to another and to God? To me, this is the meat right here. Because once again, what kind of message are we sending by the way we treat others? And see, that's why I was saying about the offense part, because that's what's wrong with when you turn the TV on. Because the women who are having these discussions are saying that was harassment to me. But what are the men saying? Men saying, oh, well, I didn't. Why are you offended by this? See, no. See, that's just no. Because the men are saying it shouldn't be offensive. That was just a joke, or we was just on a date. Or no. How are you treating others? So when all these women come out against the same person, you start to look at that man in a different light, because you say, wow, look how many women he offended. That's what happens in church. On Sunday morning is one thing, but if we go on our street and we start interviewing and people say, man, this is the rudest person on our block, we will start to see you in a different light. When you have friends and family who come, who aren't Christians, and they start saying, oh, Ellis is this way, y'all will start to see me in a different light. I will try to save face by discrediting them, by saying how hard it is dealing with them. That's not in my Bible. We started this chapter realizing how hard it is dealing with one another. But as Christians, we do it. We always minimize the offense by saying, man, it's so hard to deal with Kumar. Wrong. That's not in my Bible. Oh, my child never listened. Wrong. That's not in my Bible. Peter said, how many times I have to forgive a brother who's sinning? That means the brother is wrong. He didn't say how many times I got to offend a brother that I don't agree with. They are sinning. God never said your child wasn't hard to deal with, or your mother, or your aunt, or your coworker. He's saying, how are you dealing with it? You can't control someone else's actions. How are you treating others? This is why he says, turn the other cheek. I can't say I won't get punched tomorrow. How am I going to dictate someone else's free will? How will I react to the punch? That's why I'm saying a lot of Christians miss what Jesus is saying, because we're always talking about what we're doing. Jesus wants to know, what have you been doing in your daily interaction with human beings around the globe? Are you showing them my son by the way you treat them, not by how somebody treats you? That's why Jesus is bleeding to death saying, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That's why Stephen is bleeding to death saying, forgive them. And you have Christians who've been baptized 1,000 years talking about how difficult it is to deal with somebody. Who said it's not difficult to deal with someone? That's not the argument here. The argument is unity. And it has to maintain that. That's why I say all the time when there's any conflict, I want to know, how are people treating one another? The next Sunday, you see somebody who you have a problem with, are you going to purposely walk the other way? On Sunday, when they say, oh, get up and greet your neighbor, you're going to pretend like you got to go to the bathroom because you can't hug them? And you're going to tell me that God is pleased with you? Where? Show me. Somebody show me in your Bible. This is the next level of Christianity. It's showing us, if you really want to be a Christian, you got to be Christ-like to everyone. When you see the woman in the well, you got to talk to her. Even though your friends were saying, we hungry. Come on, we got somewhere to go. You have to look out for her. You got to be, man, I know my child did me wrong. But the prodigal fathers, I'm going to be waiting for my son. That is that next level. So that's, to me, is the 70 times 7. But we miss this point because it's very hard to implement. It's hard to do these things that we just read in Matthew 18. That's why we make cop-out excuses saying, oh, it's Kuman's fault. And if I get enough of y'all to believe Kuman is the blame, then you will agree with Ellis. But what is our Father in heaven saying? Our Father in heaven saying it's not Kuman's fault. It's Ellis' fault because Ellis refused to forgive Kuman. Let me, as Kuman's father, deal with Kuman. right? That's what happens with relationships. Let your Father in heaven deal with your spouse wrongdoing. You love your spouse. Isn't that in our Bible? See, that is the real stuff when we want to start talking about other things, because it's hard to do that. It's hard to be married and you know your spouse is wrong and still eat with them, because you say, I could have ate already. Look at the little things. We don't even have to talk about big conflict. It's hard to eat at the same table with people who have your last name that offended you last night. Am I lying? You could eat anywhere. It's hard to eat. That's why the Bible said, don't let the sun go down. You should try to resolve that while today is today, because you could wake up and the person you were fighting with, they didn't wake up. Now what you thinking about?
In the question, Beulah, and it's just something that, you know, you have honestly admitted to and doing. The question of question number 5, like, how can we be guilty of the sin of the unmerciful servant in Matthew 18? Again, because we don't have shepherds in this congregation, the policing that's done in the congregation have to come from the word, because you can't have one shepherd. When I, as the minister here, tell you something that you're doing is wrong, tell you about conflict resolutions, and try to get you to see to do the right thing, I can't make you do that. As a congregation, when these things exist in our congregation or any congregation worldwide, what we just read in Matthew 18 is still unresolved where? In heaven. Because God is not the author of confusion. So you either be on the right side of leadership, or because of your love for that person or those individuals, you be on their side. And that's how you get church splits, because the people you allow to come into your living room, in your dinner table, and talk that way about the church make you just as guilty as the person that's talking that way, because that person won't listen to leadership. That's why I tell y'all all the time, the things that people tell y'all, they don't tell me when I call them up. But you won't believe me because you've been talking to them prior to their leaving. I don't talk to people that way. When people are in my presence, I treat everybody the same, and I tell everybody the same thing. And when people start drifting, I tell them to come back. In order to leave something that you don't like, you have to first find fault. People just don't up and leave. Okay? And generally, it's in the season that they're in that they don't like a particular thing. And they won't listen when they're told to do the right thing. Because eventually, they want to live the life that they want to live, and they want to eventually get out of here. Remember, the minister is not at fault when he takes the darts, because what he's saying is to get people to change. And people don't even want to change in hearing the doctrine. Let alone changing their lifestyle. Because remember, you only get preaching once a week. Here is 45 minutes, depending on what I'm preaching on. Then the rest of that week, you're on your own. And you're on social media talking about it. Most people in church talk about the sermon after church. Amen? Y'all know y'all do. Y'all go on Facebook, you tell your friends who work here, it's a great sermon, really nice, or it was a sermon that you didn't like, or I don't know. What else is still on this love kick? Or something like that. Or you're talking to people how positive it was, and you're trying to get them who are not here to be here to hear that, right? That's why we live stream. Okay? So go and study the Old Testament teaching on offense. Look the word up in Greek. Study the word in Greek and Hebrew, because the Gospels were written in Greek. So study the word in Greek and Hebrew. Look at the teaching that Jesus must be under in the Old Testament, and the teaching for the congregation after his ascension to heaven. And then you will see what Matthew 18 is talking about. You can co-reference the Gospels that's referring to that if you want, I'm staying with Matthew 18 simply because it was in the book. So I didn't want to go anywhere outside of the book. The author did it again in question number 5 by asking you as a reader and me as a reader, how can we become guilty of sin of the unmerciful service in Matthew 18? And to Ellis's point, it is personal. So don't think it's not, it's personal. And Bueller, to the point that you were making, the congregation is slowed down because Achan had something under his tent. So when the congregation is not moving, you ask the question, why are we not growing? Guys, there's a lot of baggage in here. And that's what I'm trying to get you to see on Sunday morning. When people come in here, at least on Sunday morning, be happy. At least on Sunday morning, be happy. And until you're ready to take that old suitcase out there in the hallway and leave it out there, you're still going to have those issues. You're going to have issues with the gospel. Okay? All right. Let's end there.